Parliamentary.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. I would also like to acknowledge the member from Timmins, James Bay, who has brought forward an important motion to the House of Commons today. I also, Mr. Speaker, would like to commend the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations, who have been a strong leader on all Indigenous issues in this country. And I want to say that as an Indigenous woman myself, as a Canadian, I'm very proud to be a part of a government that has made clear its determination to build a new relationship with Indigenous people that is based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Canada also understands that it cannot move forward in full partnership with Indigenous people and make progress on the national journey of reconciliation without first acknowledging the wrongs of the past. To truly advance the nation-to-nation, Inuit to Crown, and government-to-government relationships, we must recognize the historical past of our country and try to make amends for the wrongs that were suffered by Indigenous people. And all Canadians must be a part of this process, the process of changing the future of this country for better and for everyone who lives here. To move forward with reconciliation, we must also understand the role of residential schools in our history. That is why the former Prime Minister apologized to the survivors of residential schools in this country and did so right here in this chamber. However, at that time, my constituents were excluded, and I remember the hurt that they suffered during that period. And this is why the current Prime Minister delivered an official apology on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians to former students of Newfoundland and Labrador residential schools and to their families on November 24th, 2017 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. Children in my riding were taken from their homes, from their families, and from their communities. From communities like Cartwright and Black Tickle, from Goose Bay and Hopedale, Makkovik and Nain, Natwishish and Northwest River, Postville and Rigolette, and from so many other parts of our province. Children were isolated from their families, they were uprooted from their communities, and they were stripped of their identity. They were subjected to abuse, they were punished for speaking their own language, and they were prohibited from practicing their own culture. The consequences of colonialism have been felt far beyond the walls of these schools, consequences that have persisted from generation to generation, and those that continue to be felt today by so many Canadians, so many in my own riding, and so many more across the country. These are the hard truths that are part of our country's history. These are the hard truths that we have to confront as a society and as parliamentarians. An apology is not only the first step towards healing and closure, but it provides a profound opportunity for people to forgive. That apology must be sincere, it must be honest, and it must be about acknowledging the hurt and the pain that has been done. Of the 130 residential schools in this country, 1/3 of them were owned and operated by the Catholic Church. It is about ensuring that survivors that have had these experiences will not be forgotten. That it is time to make things right, to accept responsibility and acknowledge the failings so that survivors can finally begin to heal. When I was in Happy Valley Goose Bay, in my constituency, surrounded by so many of my friends, including my mother, who is a survivor of residential schools, When I sat there on that day when the Prime Minister delivered an official apology on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, to those in that room and to many other former students in Newfoundland and Labrador of residential schools, and to so many of their families, it was heartfelt. It was sincere. It was real. It was about understanding and feeling the pain, the suffering, the emotion that so many had been inflicted with, that so many had had to go through in this country. The moving words from one survivor, Toby Obed, showed the real power of an apology. He told those that were gathered that day in Happy Valley Goose Bay that this apology is an important part of the healing. Today, the survivors in Newfoundland and Labrador, we can finally feel a part of the community of survivors that have been nationwide across Canada. We have connected with the rest of Canada, he said. He said, we got our apology. Those were the words of Toby Obed, a residential school survivor, in finally receiving the words of the Prime Minister of Canada saying, we are sorry. We are truly sorry for what has happened to you and so many others. We know the delay in that apology caused greater suffering and greater pain. The absence of an apology and recognizing experiences has been an impediment to healing and reconciliation for long enough. Over the past years, there has been a shift in the way that this country and this government views its relationship with Indigenous people, but that is not by accident. That shift is led by our Prime Minister and Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians all over this country. It is a pivotal time. It is an opportunity to create real change, to ensure that Indigenous communities are engaged and that there is a genuine desire among Canadians to see things changed. I want to mention the Minister's Special Representative, James Igliordi, who's a retired provincial judge, a former class member of residential schools, an Inuk man who has been a lifetime resident in our province and in Labrador. And I want to acknowledge and thank him for the work that he has done with so many people in my riding around residential schools. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to say that as a government, we recognize the intergenerational harms that have been caused by residential schools, and the consequences of colonialization continue to be felt by so many people. Mr. Speaker, I know that we can't change the past, but we can right past wrongs for a better future. We ask the Catholic Church and the Papal to be a part of that process, as so many of their loyal followers in this country have already done, person to person, individual to individual, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister stated on November 24, 2017 in this speech, and I want to quote him, "Let this day mark the beginning of a new chapter in our history, one in which we vow to never forget the harm that we have caused and vow to renew our relationship. Let this new chapter be one in which Indigenous and non-Indigenous people build that future they want together." That has been the words of our Prime Minister. That has been the mission of this government, and that has been the work of reconciliation of all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I know that there are so many people out there today. There are so many people out there today that have felt such a tremendous awakening within them with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was born out of a negotiated settlement and an agreement that included compensation for survivors. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in all of their calls to action, was to create a better society for all Canadians, for all of us in this country. And that call to action number 58 called upon the Pope to issue an apology to residential school survivors and to their families and to their communities. We continue to believe that an apology from the Pope on behalf of the Catholic Church, as he has done to others in the world, is a very important step, acknowledging the past and moving towards reconciliation. Canada has apologized for its role in residential schools. We expect others to do the same and do so with sincerity, speaking word to truth and allowing the journey towards a new chapter to continue for all people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for